Well, good morning, and thank you for going along for the ride, flowing with the go, as we call it at the Burrier household. Because we were doing the Heart Sutra in memory of Megan McCarthy this morning, and there was the off chance that her 5-year-old daughter was going to be joining. I thought, well, if the child joins, if London joins, it'd be good if she could see me and I could see her. So I set up the second camera facing me, and then the first camera facing the altar as usual. And then I realized that they had to be two different identities, so I set one up as Prajna Hart and one as Dan. And then I realized that my cell phone had no power, so I made Dan the co-host in case the cell phone went down. And then when I muted some of you, I muted myself apparently as well. So, there you go. Long chain of trying to experiment and do the right thing. But anyway, thank you really everybody for being here and for taking part in a ceremony for somebody you don't know, in a way, right? I mean, you don't know my close friend Hannah Soar, um, wonderful young woman who's in her early 30s, that through business I had a chance to travel around the world with, and we became very, very close. Nor her fiance, Ryan McCarthy, who lost his sister 10 days ago suddenly, and leaving behind a 5-year-old daughter. And yet by taking part in the ceremony, by chanting the Heart Sutra together, we're really activating and strengthening that net that we've talked about, Indra's net, where each of us is a pearl reflecting the perfections and the imperfections of all the other pearls in the net. So I appreciate you taking part and pushing that net out ever wider. Hannah and Ryan are in New York City, and London, the little girl, is in Rhode Island, and the family is really building that net around her, in the face of this tragedy. So it's part of what we do. It's part of what I signed up to do, taking vows, what Galen signed up to do, taking vows, what all of you really have signed up to do just by stepping into this life and this way of being and walking in the world. We talked last week about the voice of the raindrops, hearing the voice of the raindrops outside, and our practice being like walking with grace across smooth ice. All of this comes to us, the joys and the sorrows and the fear and the exuberance of being human. So yeah, and then it comes up too when you go and do the whole Heart Sutra, in a heartfelt way, and then realize that you were doing it by yourself and nobody could hear you, and then you have to roll with the punches. What you didn't hear in the first recitation is that I completely clanged the big bell, and I was like, oh damn, But now I know you didn't hear that. It was really awful, or not. So thanks again, and good morning, everyone. Gabriel, welcome back. Um, everybody, John Hopper, Dylan, everybody, Sharma, Mel, Tal, Melissa, Marshart, Mark, Ken, Dan. Welcome to us all. I had picked a koan to cover this morning that wasn't necessarily related to the fact that we were going to do that service or any of the things that have transpired in the meantime. But in the way of koans, they tend to somehow be our life, no matter which one you pick up. No matter which one you cover, it's almost in a way like you could flip open any one of the number of books and put your finger down and start exploring that koan. And at least for me, and I suspect for most of us, there would be something there where you're like, yeah, there I am. You know, that's what I need to work on. This is how is that so? How could this be the one? And so, case 80 in the Blue Cliff record. I mean, I love it from the beginning. It's the title is On Rushing Water. On Rushing Water. Now, this koan itself in short form also appears in the Dharmakaya koan, so some of you have worked with it or soon will be. A monk asked Joshu, does a newborn infant also have 6 consciousnesses? Joshu said, a ball tossed on rushing water. The monk went on to ask Toshi, what is the meaning of a ball tossed on rushing water? And Toshi said, moment to moment, non-stop flow. Moment to moment, non-stop flow. The verse, inactivation of the 6 consciousnesses presents a question. The adepts both discerned where it comes from. A ball tossed on boundless rushing water. It doesn't stay where it lands. Who can watch? So, the question, does a newborn infant also have 6 consciousnesses? It seems like a fairly straightforward and reasonable question. The 6 senses, the 6 consciousnesses, are we born with it? Is it always there? Or, a baby just born, are they the 6 senses, the 6 consciousnesses? Now, remember, in Buddhism, you've got the 5, traditional senses of sight, touch, hearing, taste, smell. I don't know if I got 5. And then you have mind, or perception, it is sometimes called, as the 6th consciousness. And so the monk he's actually, he's either asking a pure question, but more than likely in the context of this koan, he's setting up a trap for Joshu, and then for Toshi. It's like, okay, I'm going to see what I get from the teacher. I'm going to test Joshu. And in the way of koans and in the way of an adept or a master, Joshu does not give a direct answer in the sense of yes or no, but says a ball tossed on rushing water. So, what happens when you toss a ball on rushing water? The ball lands and it's off. It lands and it's off. And for that moment where we see it land and then moving, we have a sense or a glimpse of there's the river moving. But, they think about a river moving. Think about looking at a river, looking at rushing water. Where is the river? Like, where is it? Which point on the river is the river? And where's it going? And how far can you follow it downstream? I mean, So, in one sense, we're standing there looking at a river, and I say, "Show me the river." How are you going to do that? Where is the river? Here, gone. And yet, river also has that sense of, even though it's in constant sense of change and flow, and even though there's no one point you can grab and one point you can follow, it's always river. I mean, while it's river, now I'm not talking about drying up in the middle of summer and drought, right? Not as far as the water flowing anyway. But the flow is constant. The river is always there. And yet the molecules, the water, is rushing by and gone out of our consciousness before we know what happened. Where'd it go? Is it at the sea? When does it get to the sea? When it gets to the sea, did it get to the sea, or did it get to a cloud? Or is it now rain? So, how do you grasp that? Should you grasp that? So Joshu's answer is really beautiful, because throw a ball on rushing water, the ball touches or alights on the water, and it's gone. So for a moment we get a sense of that. And those of you that have gone through Introduction to Zen Meditation with me or others know that there's a metaphor that is sometimes used. I quite like it, is a child stepping into a stream of water. You step there and the water's flowing around you, and it's a beautiful, wonderful experience of life. We're playing in the water, but do we stop the stream? No, we don't stop the stream. We stand in it. And then, just as when we're counting our breaths or working on a koan, a thought or a leaf going downstream might distract us, and we're carried downstream toward the lake or the ocean. Before we know it, like we're halfway gone, halfway there. And then we catch ourselves and come back to one, or come back to our koan, or come back marsh to just sitting. And the water's still flowing, the river's still flowing. A ball tossed on rushing water. And so people beginning the practice often say, I can't stop my thoughts. I can't stop my mind. I can't stop the river. Well, I mean, do we need to stop it? Or is it just being in it and being with it? Now, when does this begin? I was struck as I was doing the Heart Sutra at least twice this morning. No end to old age, and no old age and death, and no end to old age and death. No suffering, no cause of suffering. Right? There's a lot of couplets in the Heart Sutra. And as I was going through that, I saw this stream, this endless stream. Because as Galen has asked a couple times in discussions, when did you begin? Do you remember when you began? It's a favorite question of Tenshin Roshi's as well. When did you begin? When are you aware of you being you? Versus, the one who sees through these eyes and hears through these ears. It has always been so. The river is there. And we might toss a ball on it and claim it for a moment, but it's always there and always flowing and always changing. Impermanence in Buddhist terminology. And then Toshi, when asked the same question or asked to elaborate on it, this must have been rather frustrating to the monk, right? Okay, well, Joshu says a ball tossed on, rushing water. Okay, what's the meaning of that? And the answer he gets is moment to moment, nonstop flow. Beautiful, beautiful teaching from these two masters here, because you don't get a yes or a no. You get something to sit further with, to work further with, to to be with, moment to moment, non-stop flow. And so, Ryan, who lost his sister, I who lost my father, or any of us that have lost anyone, it's like, we lose them, and we don't. And it raises questions about our own lives too. Where did it begin and where does it end? And the words in the sutras and the chants, no old age and death, no old age and death, and no end to old age and death, can seem rather loopy and obscure, if you just approach them with a rational mind. But, from the point of view of practice and being with our lives, isn't it just an illusion or a delusion that we know where this begins and we know where this ends? And then the whole gate parasamgate bodhisvaha, loosely translated as going, 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 gone to the other shore. Hallelujah. Loose translation. Where's the other shore? We're always reaching out for that other shore, always tossing that ball on the water and trying to stay with it. And yet the other shore is right under our feet all the time. This is what we can realize, is that this is it. This is it. There's a lot of beauty and power in it. And then again, here I sit in robes and get asked to do ceremony, formal funerals, for example. And one of the functions of the role is to provide some solace and some comfort, But if you walk up to somebody that just lost somebody and go, don't worry, it's all beginningless, it's all endless, we're always on the other shore, it's okay. I would say that's not preaching in response. As one of the other things is because here we are in the relative world too, and someone is grieving, and even some of these beautiful Zen truths, when spoken in Zen language and communicated like that, somebody is in absolute grief and sobbing and can't believe what just happened, and you go gate parasamgate bodhisvaha and bow, you should probably be slapped. So again, like walking on that ice, keep practicing. What does it mean? Mark and I talked about this, and Gabriel and I and Tal and I and Andre, any of us that talked this week talked about this. It's like these insights that we have, the things that we gain. Valerian, I don't think he's here this morning. How do you walk out the door with it? What do you do when you get that call? Because I'm telling you, you will get the call, and you don't have to be in robes to get the call. In fact, it might be better not to be in robes. I mean, the first time I officially got that call, Drew Rothman, who some of you know, had just lost Bonnie, and she was one of our Sangha members, and Drew called me, and he was with Bonnie, but she had just passed, and he said, "Can you come over?" And I said, of course. I had just taken Tokido not that long before that, novice priest. So I immediately started calling, my teacher and a couple other people. Go, what do I do? what do I do? And it's like, well, go be there, do the Heart Sutra. Sorry, Mel. Mel's having audio issues. Is anyone else? Okay. Um, Mel, you might try turning your camera off. Sometimes that gives you more bandwidth. Take the Heart Sutra with you. Sit with Drew. You know, usher Bonnie to the other shore. And so I went. I grabbed the gear and I grabbed the sutra sheet and I went over there and yeah, I think Drew and I have talked about it since. I think I did a decent job of it. I think he did an excellent job of being with his just departed wife. And we sat there for a couple hours, and I said, we probably need to call somebody, you know. And so we called a couple of authorities, and then I wish I had had the training that our book club friend Paul Barsky is in right now, basically chaplain training, because in that they actually take you through some of the specifics of what do you do in these instances, because the paramedics showed up, the police showed up, and all of a sudden I found ourselves getting questioned. When did she die? How long ago? What did you do? How did you know she was dead? Who are you? Why haven't you called for 2 hours? You know? And I finally realized I just needed to stand up and go, I am Drew's priest. And I did that, and at that point it at least stopped the Inquisition, except that the police officer said, come with me. And we walked outside and he said, look, have you done this before? And I said, no. And he said, okay, so here's what you need to do next time you're faced with this. And it was really great. He said, just do this, this, and this. You still be priest, but if you take care of these few functional things, it'll go smoother, for the person grieving. And so we learn, right? And again, if I had just, gone all pious and bowed and gate, I mean, it's like there's time, place, person, and amount. So all of us will get called, and how do you behave, and how do you reach out for help, and what do you learn? So does a newborn infant also have six consciousnesses? In a way, is not the right question, right? Because in a way, it presumes the beginning and end of this beginningless, endless thing. I don't remember who I was talking with this week, about that expansion of self, right? That expansion of consciousness, that mind that is really meant as the sixth sense, which is perception. I mean, it is all of our experience, all of perception. It includes everything. And from that point of view of perception, there is no beginning and there is no end. They're not just loopy words on a piece of paper. No beginning, no end. Is a newborn baby born with all of the six consciousnesses. There's a classic presentation to the koan, which I'm not going to do, obviously. But when you go beyond it and revisit it, and it's a ball tossed on rushing water. I just really wanted to offer that up today. I think it's such a beautiful piece of poetry. A ball tossed on rushing water. Non-stop flow. To the extent we can, be the child standing in the stream, enjoy that non-stop flow, and invite other people in. I sure miss being in the room with all of you. It's very odd doing this into little windows and silence. But I'm getting used to pretending. I hope it works okay. And I did see that the Supreme Court just ruled that churches cannot be prohibited from doing indoor services. I momentarily felt like a right winger going, yeah, Um, but it is funny because that comes from the conservative point of view of it's freedom of church, right? Freedom of religious expression. It is kind of funny that you can go shopping at the mall but can't go to church. Having said that, we still need to look at what's safe and what's prudent in terms of being indoors with each other and chanting, and we're tracking all of that. Um, but yeah, I do miss all of you, in body as well as spirit. We are having a sunset sit on Thursday evening, the 11th at 5 p.m. at the Baldwin Hills Overlook in Los Angeles. For anybody that does want to join together outdoors, we'll be bringing cushions, bring your own. But that'll be appropriately socially distanced, and we'll just sit into the sunset for those of you that are around and want to have at least 6 foot proximity with each other. A ball tossed on rushing water. And thank you for sharing the flow with me this morning. And I will open it up now for any thoughts or questions or commentary or anything anybody else would like to add. You can unmute yourself or raise your hand. Go, Galen.
So Dan, I'm sure you're familiar, 2 or 3 koans after the one that you just presented, there's a koan that I vaguely recall that talks about how do you teach a, a, a blind person, a mute person, or a deaf person. I was pretty sure that you were leading into that the way this meeting started this morning. I thought maybe we had one of those see with your ears and hear with your eyes kind of thing going. One of my favorite recurring thoughts about this no beginning, no end thing is a monk or someone, maybe I don't remember, said, would you ever ask a cloud what its birthday was? You know, and then said, imagine the formation and the dissolution of a cloud, and use that as a visual input for this notion of always here, always gone. Anyway, that was just my input.
Thank you, Galen. Galen, I love the when does a cloud born, always here, always gone. I mean, this is tricky stuff and not, because life and death are they're markers, and there's something that we have to deal with, whether we want to or not. And there's great peace, I think, in the practice, and great peace in the nonstop flow, and yet there's agony too. That's why I caution, right? It's like, find the real truth, not the platitudes. Melissa?
Yeah, I love this talk, just because this question of life and death is so present right now, and in this time of COVID, there's, I've known people who have passed, but I mainly have that they're kind of 1 degree out from me. So I have friends who have known like family members and stuff, and their friends who have passed. And I think it's such a good point that you're saying, like, so when someone is dealing with death, you can't say, well, they've just gone to the other side of the shore, or you can't really, it doesn't land right if you just give like a Zen principle, and the true compassion in that situation is just really being there, just listening and being with whatever is there for them. Um, it reminded me of the other night. I was having dinner with a friend of mine, and she said, I was telling her about a conflict that I was having with a friend. And she said, well, if you really understood emptiness, this wouldn't be bothering you. And it triggered me so bad. I was so upset by that comment. I'm like, I do understand emptiness. I know what it is, but I'm still pissed. Anyway, so it's like this. I love the I find peace and solace in the Zen ideas of emptiness and no separation and going to the other shore. But there's like a time and place for it to land, for ourselves and for others. So anyway, that when you brought up that point, it just like really resonated with me about how you were handling it, how you handle it when someone has passed, talking to the person.
Yeah, and Melissa, there's a potential trap, isn't there? Also, just even in the ideas of
Yeah.
Zen,
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
right?
Yeah. It's just another idea that's made up. Anyway.
Right. So that's why we focus so much on the experience. So
Yes.
we keep driving for the realization, the experience, so that it is no longer just a concept.
Yeah. Yes.
You know. It's the thing I appreciate most about my practice. I read about Buddhism for years. And it was pretty cool. That's cool. And like some form of confirmation bias, you read what you want to read and it makes you feel how you want to feel. But it's very different than to finally sit down and confront some of this on the cushion and see where you're really at on it. And then again, different still to go out into the world and try to live and be appropriately, not as a concept, you know? How do I, Melissa, how do I, Dan, exist out there not as a concept?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, when I went through Jakai, we had my Jakai group art. Remember, right? We had a bunch of people going through, and then we broke into some subgroups, and we would go over to Denny's and have conversations about whatever the homework was for the day. I had like 5 or 6 people in my group. It used to drive me absolutely nuts. When people are just talking about relative and absolute, relative and absolute. Well, that's relative. Well, that's the absolute. I didn't know what any of that was. As concept. I'm not sure I still do. As words when you start going, well, but that's the relative. You know, it's anyway. Thank you for bringing that up. Ken, can I ask you a question?
Yes, you may.
I know. I mean, you could say no. Um, I just know because you brought it up recently with the whole group, so I don't feel like I'm stepping out of bounds. But with your recent experience of testing positive for COVID and really facing mortality, any observations from that place?
Um, well, the main observation I experienced was how ordinary mortality is. It's no big deal. It's nothing special. In yoga, we like to say you are unique but not special. And that was driven home to me. It's not a big deal. It's just another ball thrown into the river. And yet at the same time, I'm experiencing it. So again, you talk about there is nothing more absolute or relative than life or death. It's crazy, but it's also true. Where something like mortality can just become a concept, an idea that I and we happen to be experiencing. And so it's the same coin, importance on one side, unimportance on the other, and they're equally the same, which is an odd thing to say, but in my experience, it's absolutely true. It's a big deal, and it's not a big deal. It's staring you in the face, and it's not staring you in the face. So, and in the end, here I am, 7 weeks later. It's as if nothing happened. And I say that because although I may have been going through a particular experience, so was the rest of the world. So were all of you, in your own way, experiencing whatever you were experiencing. Not necessarily a positive reading, but something else. So, all of those molecules in the river all equal the same thing. It's just water. And you can do what you will with it, right? So in a sense, I experienced the mantra at the end of the Heart Sutra, gone, gone, gone beyond, beyond. Yay. And it's really it's a crazy notion of something being so important and not important at all. It's a weird place to be, but I've been in that space for 7 weeks now, balancing importance and non-importance. I mean everything and I mean nothing. It's craziness. And yes, a lot of times having to sit with koans, it strikes me as being utterly absurd and silly. And then I have to think about what I mean by silliness, because it's all silly. It's all a Monty Python skit, and yet it's very important to all of us. Yeah. It's absolutely real and tangible, and you have it or you don't. And so, yeah, it's as we say in yoga, you can have the negative mind, the positive mind, and eventually the neutral mind, which of course is emptiness. I'm stuck in all of my minds, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Ken.
That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, it's, and I just encourage all of us to explore these issues of beginning and end, life and death, nonstop flow for ourselves, because, even when you look at the number of people on this screen today, each of us have different and intimate experiences with this, with people we may have lost or not, and different levels of grief or not around this. And then what is that experience? I was sharing with Mark earlier this week that when my father passed away 4 years ago, I did not get that Hollywood grief moment that I thought I was going to get. It never actually occurred in that fashion for me. At least not yet. At least not yet. Weird things though, like sitting in Dodger Stadium at a game and just the crowd was cheering and just breaking down sobbing. And that was my father, or driving up toward Mammoth and there's that cinder cone on the right when you're heading north, that very iconic cinder cone, and just having to pull over on the side of the road. So it occurs differently for all of us, and we all have different experiences. So I'm very hesitant to preach on this one other than preach the practice. They say practice what you preach. I think this one is just practice what you practice. Anybody else?
Yeah, this topic has been kind of spinning around a lot with koans and just in general with all of the death that's been going on just everywhere, celebrities, people getting sick. And I've had a lot of it in my life, and I realize, like, it's never the same. Like, the grief moment is never the same. The only thing that it does stay the same for me is at some point I stopped grieving like the loss of the vessel, right? Like that's something that I've just realized recently, is that it's, it was last night that it hit me. We went out to Encinitas and we ended up sitting on the beach right after sunset and meditating, and I just had this overwhelming just feeling that everybody was there with me, and it was really a result of the koan that I've been working on with Dan. And yeah, I just, like, there aren't words, right? Like I know that you can all understand there aren't words, and it's that what you said earlier about standing in the river and it flows around you, right? And like that's, to me, that's this whatever is happening, and we just get that moment in the river where everything's going around us. I watched this show recently called Surviving Death, and there's a bunch of stuff in there that was kind of hokey, but they touch on resurrection, and how people, like, kids are born and they can give all of these verifiable details of somebody's life that happened before they were around. Like, there's no way they would know. And it's it touched something in me to realize, like exactly what is life, right? And when is it gone? And I don't know, like, it's just trying to put all of these things that are swirling, that are just so crazy lately, and then every time we sit down and talk and it all touches on it, and I don't really know what to do with it. But it's so amazing to see, and to kind of experience it all, and to have people that I can come here and ramble all this stuff about and not be looked at like I'm absolutely insane. So I absolutely appreciate all of you, and so grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Keep up the good work. All right, Chalet.
No, I was just like really moved by Mark, by what Mark was saying, and just kind of like came across, here we're talking about death, or you're talking about death and this experience, and you're so full of life and joy when you're talking about this. I don't know, just moved me. That's all. That's what I was thinking about.
Thanks, Shirley. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it occurs to me, of course, the koan is, does a baby have the six consciousnesses when he's born? So, ostensibly the topic is about birth,
Yeah,
you know,
I know.
and yet they walk hand in hand. I mean,
They
it's
do.
so it's there's truth and trope in all of it. I remember sitting late in one session working on some koan. I was very frustrated, I had the conceptual observation of like, well, wait a minute, I've always been me, whatever that is, as a little boy, as a teenager, as a young man, as a not so young man. It's like when you look at Facebook pictures of your high school, somebody from your high school class, and you go, oh my God, they're so old, right? Because from the perspective of just seeing through these eyes and hearing through these ears, it's like that this is my life, and yet it changes all around me all the time. My own body, which I might call myself, changes all the time. So at a conceptual level, that's fun to play with. You're like, oh wow, well if that's true, then then maybe it really is beginningless, endless. But then moving beyond the concept and really sitting into that so that it doesn't just become a story on a Dharma talk is different. And then it washes over you at sunset in Encinitas, or wherever it is. Yeah. Thanks, Shelley. I think I've said everything that I have to say or not say about this. Gabriel, you okay over there? Beautiful photo.
Yes, all is good. Sorry, I was planning on listening in from home, but I had to drive my girlfriend last second. But I've been kind of thinking about like the river and like not knowing where it ends and where it begins, and how like that truly points to how little we actually really know about anything in general. And like letting go of all these certainties um, is definitely really freeing. And I feel like I get so wrapped up in trying to figure out the river that I am not letting it flow, and I'm not listening to the beautiful sound of the water passing by. Yeah. Thank you.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you. I also want to thank all the people wandering through the backgrounds, because I know that there's family, you know, Marco, hello, Mark, to your family, hello in the background, Gabriel, to your girlfriend, and Sharma, your son's somewhere, you know. Appreciate the time with you and appreciate your families for their contribution. So it's just kind of fun getting that little window of people passing through every once in a while. All right. Well, let's end a little bit early. Let's do the vows. Melissa, I didn't ask you to do the announcements, but you're good for it. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So let's ring out with the 4 vows. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to say